The growth and triumph of the early Christian church is the most important event of all time. This series of videos is devoted to how and why that happened. Greetings, everyone. Today I would like to begin a series on the most astonishing event that has ever occurred in the history of the human race: the growth and triumph of the Christian church. What if the Romans had gathered back in the 1st century AD, say about 60, and they gathered together the leading intellectuals of the empire for a sort of 1st century TED Talks? And what if the topic was, what are the most important future trends of the empire? What do you think they would have said? One might have talked about the barbarians camped just outside the border of the empire and what kind of threat that they might pose. Another one might have spoken about urban unemployment, or how the bread and circuses social program was not going to work very well in the long run. But what if one of them had stood up and said, "Gentlemen, the future of the empire lies literally under our feet"? That person would have been right. Because literally under their feet, down in the burial caves, the catacombs, the young Christian church was meeting. Not a single Roman intellectual would have guessed that this tiny group of mostly low-class, severely persecuted people would eventually conquer the empire and then go on to be, by far, the most powerful force the human race has ever seen. Unknown to all, the tiny Christian church was the most important factor in the future of the empire. Let's go back to the beginning of the church. In Acts chapter 1, verse 15 in the New Testament, we find that the bulk, if not all, of Jesus' followers are gathered in one room in Jerusalem. According to the text, there are 120 of them. And so that's what Jesus had to show for 3 years of ministry. He had 120 followers. In the next chapter, at the end of chapter 2, we find that the church has already grown to 3,000 people. And by the time you get to the early part of chapter 4, you find that it's at 5,000. The church then begins to spread into the regions around Jerusalem. And by the end of the book of Acts, we find the church has spread throughout almost the entire eastern half of the Roman Empire. Now, we know very few names from that era. They had no international organizations. They had no celebrities. They had no well-known public figures. To the best of our knowledge, not a single one of them ever held public office. They had no political power. All we know is that the Christian church continued to grow and spread. By 313 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine declared the Christian church a legal religion. This is only 270 years after that evening in the book of Acts when there were only 120 of them. By this time, the Christian church had become the most powerful force within the empire. No one knows for sure how many there were. The estimates are between 5 and 10 million. But at any rate, the 120 of Acts chapter 1 have now become many, many millions. And the Christian church was on its way to becoming the first worldwide religion in the history of the human race. In future videos, I want to examine how this happened, what caused the most astonishing development in the history of the world.